This is the Toss-Up, where we take a look at some of the topics facing the world of college sports and give a little bit of the history behind some of them. We're not trying to change your mind. We just want to dive deeper into the topics that keep you tuned into the teams you love. Fans of college football, prepare to focus on the college playoff and the 4 teams that will be included in the race towards a championship. However, many fans consider the champion of Division I football nothing more than a myth based on opinion. When you consider the history of determining a champion at this level, it might surprise you that access to a championship is nothing more than a special club for haves and have-nots.
Sports writers and so-called football experts have always decided the national champion in what would eventually become the Football Bowl subdivision. It was an exclusive club mainly for East Coast teams from the Ivy League. The first school to break this trend was Michigan, and if you know the words to their fight song, The Champions of the West, pays homage to this history. Louisiana State became the first team in the South to be recognized as a champion. In 1936, Minnesota was recognized as the Associated Press champion, and the AP has been influential in determining the national champion ever since. Many schools count multiple championships depending on who is the determining body at the time, which is mainly because as many as 5 different groups have determined a champion. There was not a playoff in college football until the division split, and Florida A&M won the championship in 1978 through a playoff system. The NCAA does not recognize the Football Bowl subdivision champion for one major reason. All member schools are not guaranteed access to a national championship. The college football playoff is a step in that direction, but it still works in the history of determining a champion by what amounts to a popularity contest, as opposed to competition on the field between all schools in the FBS.
Joining me for today's Toss-Up are Lydia Knoll, who works in community relations with the Indianapolis Colts, Amon Higgins, who is a sports media major at Indiana University, and Griffin Weinberg, who is a play-by-play announcer covering women's soccer. Let's go ahead and start with you, Griffin. What are some of your thoughts about the top 25 and how it operates?
Well, personally, I'm a fan of the top 25 when you're talking about the coaches poll. Now, the AP top 25, I think, is a completely different thing, and that's something that I'm not really agreeing with, because when it comes to the AP top 25, I'm not sure who those people are who are voting for the college football teams to be in the top 25. But for the coaches poll, you know that those are the coaches who are watching constantly who the teams are and how those teams are playing and exactly how they are. You know, they know what's happening on the field. So I like the coaches top 25, but I'm not really a big AP kind of person.
Well, when it comes to the top 25 in the coaches poll, I mean, when you have a little bit of personal bias in there, for example, it's well known that Steve Spurrier always puts a vote in for Duke. So how arbitrary is the coaches poll, Lydia?
I think you're right, Jacques. I think each coach is going to have their biases the same way the people behind the AP poll are going to have their biases. It's hard to separate the teams that some of these coaches have been around and what they've grown up with. So either way, you have people that are going to be voting based on their favorite teams, possibly maybe some teams that they think are better just because they've been around them more, they know them better, and not necessarily completely unbiased.
One thing that is good about the coaches poll, though, is, as you were saying, Griffin, it does at least have the people who are watching the sport every day and have a little more of knowledge about what's going on. However, that's kind of sort of the same thought behind the AP, though, isn't it, Amon?
You could say that because these people are considered professionals at what they do at analyzing these specific sports. So, I mean, I guess that's how they gain this position. But my thing is, who's giving them this position to make these rankings, to set this standard? Because like Griffin said, they're not the coaches, because at the end of the day, X's and O's and actually being there matters more than those people who are looking from the inside out. Those coaches know what's going on and what's not going on, and people from the outside trying to look in can make mistakes and have people making bad decisions as to who they believe in, or even just placing different players, different teams on the poll.
So one of the topics that came up in the package that a lot of people may or may not have known is the fact that the champion at the Division I or FBS level has never really been determined by anything other than someone's opinion. And we have come, some 100 years later, 100+ years later, and we still basically have opinions determining national championships. Is that fair to the little guy, Griffin?
It can be tough, but I mean, I think that's why the college football playoff, which was initiated a couple of years ago in the NCAA, I think that kind of changed the whole landscape of the whole top 25 due to the fact that I mean, it just kind of means that the top 25 is a little bit depleted now, because once those college football playoff rankings come out, they have a certain committee of people who are able to analyze the games at a little bit more of a deeper level than the AP can, and they can really determine who those teams might be that are going to get into the 4-team playoff. So even if you're the smaller team, if you're the little guy and you're not like an Alabama, you're kind of like a Houston Cougars who have made a little bit of a run this year, then you might get a little bit of a better perspective just because you have other people on the outside who are looking in, who are giving their own personal perspectives. And I think that it's just really a better thing that they have the college football playoff now.
But do we really expect, if Houston had not lost to Navy, do we really expect that they would have been in the top 4, Amon?
That's a very tough question, because when it comes down to your competition, it's very hard to judge a little guy by who they play and then put them up against these bigger schools like the Alabamas who win 11 championships in the AP history, or the Notre Dames who come second, in Oklahomas. So you're putting these big schools against these people or against these little guys, and you seeing the real testament, like you said. Is it Utah Cougars? Houston Cougars? Houston Cougars, excuse me. They lost to the Navy, which is usually a top-tier team. If not ranked, they're always considered a top-tier team. So if you can't beat the Navy, why would we expect you to put on a good show against Alabama?
But should that even matter? I mean, look at how it works in, let's go with high school football, for example. You have a lot of schools who play in a sorry region and still can win state. If you look at the professional league, the NFL, they have the power index. So there's no strong team there. It's basically determined on, did you meet the requirements to get into the postseason? And then, you know, if you made it to the postseason, then yes, you have a chance to get to the championship. Isn't that a little more fair than the way we do it? Or are you in favor of sticking with the polls, Lydia?
I can't say I dislike the polls. I think to some extent you have to have a ranking system. You have to figure out in some way, shape, or form who is at the top based on their performance, based on their record so far, who's playing well, who's not. I think that also gives the team an encouragement to play harder. It creates rivalry between the teams, which obviously is huge for fan base as well. But according to the teams and maybe some of the players, something like the high school setup might be more favorable. That gives some of those smaller schools a chance to still get their star moment.
The one thing that a lot of people prefer, even though there's still big money and a lot of jersey teams in college basketball, the one thing that a lot of people prefer over college basketball compared to college football is the fact that, you know, even though you might have 8 teams from the Big Ten get in, at least 1 team from the Southern Conference will still get in. And that's not something we have yet in college football.
Yeah, I think it's a lot different in college basketball, though. You know, if you want to look at it today, the coaches' preseason poll for the college basketball just came out. So let's say that there's no top 25 at all. Then you can look at a team and you could say, hey, Duke is playing today. Kansas is playing today. They always have a good team. I know that I'm going to watch them. But if you have a team like Rhode Island or St. Mary's, and they're ranked, currently when the coaches' poll came out today, they were ranked inside the top 25, Rhode Island and St. Mary's. If there's no top 25, you're not just going to turn on a St. Mary's game or a Rhode Island game if you're a casual basketball fan. You're not just going to say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and watch this game over a Duke or a Kansas game. But because they're inside the top 25, people know that this team is real and they have something to prove, and they give something to the college basketball landscape. And I think that, I mean, that is something that really helps out some of the smaller teams in college basketball, because there's over 380 schools who are at the Division I level in college basketball. So any exposure that those teams can get, but from being inside the top 25, it's just, I mean, it's only helpful for college basketball.
So is that, oh, go ahead, Lydia, I'm sorry.
I think along with that, too, goes for the young teams. You get, you know, a nice recruiting class in, or some guys that have some hidden talents, and we don't know how they're going to perform throughout the season, so you can't judge that necessarily in a poll, but that may help their rankings overall, and if it doesn't right away, then that's a team that later on can work their way up in the ranking and finally get some of the recognition that otherwise they might be completely looked over for.
I think when you talk about like a VCU and what they did, a Butler and what they've done, I want to see that in college football, because, you know, there are teams that are good in spite of the competition that they play. The only undefeated team from what was it, I think 2012, was a Utah team that embarrassed Alabama. There's no reason in the world, in my opinion, that they should not have had access to a national championship that year. There's no reason, in my opinion, we've got, 120 plus schools in Division I. There's no reason we should be having a repeat of an LSU and an Alabama.
Yeah, but if you're going back to 2012 when Utah had that kind of run, that was when it was in college football, they had the BCS standings. And those rankings, when it came to later in the season, were determined by a computer. And that's something that just kind of like, that was something that I think that they did a good job of getting rid of, because you can't let a computer decide what's going to happen. You talk about the eye test. We were talking about that, which teams are going to be better, and the coaches, I think, do a good job of that. The preseason top 25 poll for college football, they had LSU at number 5. Wisconsin was unranked. The first game of the season, Wisconsin and LSU faced off, and Wisconsin went on to beat LSU. Yeah. Wisconsin then jumps up to number 10 in the poll, and then LSU drops down to number 21. It's all about the eye test. You need the people who are actually watching the games to determine who are the better teams in college football.
Well, I still say that until there's a ranking system in the NFL, then to me the top 25 will still continue just to be something that we need to do away with, in my opinion. I felt that way for a while. I'm a fan of a school that is a D1 school. So, they've got 4 national championships to their credit. But to me, as I'm studying it now, that's no longer the point for me. I like there to be a little bit of fairness and, a little bit of arbitration. The same way we have in the FCS level, the same way we have in Division II, the same way we have in Division III. A few schools over the past few years have started restricting how student athletes communicate on social media. Clemson head coach Dabo Swinney has a policy in place that does not require student athletes to deactivate their accounts, but they should at least minimize their presence on social media when football is in season. With basketball fever already hitting Bloomington this weekend, Lydia Nall took some time to find out what the policies are here at Indiana and just how much freedom the student athletes have with their social media accounts.
Athletes have taken to social media to promote their teams and engage with the fans. Earlier this week, I had the opportunity to talk to Jeremy Gray of the Media Relations Department and get his opinion on athletes' social media use and regulation.
They are adults who it's important that we allow them to develop their own voice and view of the world and be able to express themselves freely. And there are no actual regulations on what they can and cannot do other than the ones that apply to those same NCAA rules. But we do talk to them on a per team basis. Media relations contact. We'll talk to teams preseason about ways that they should and maybe should not behave on social media for their own best interests. Be careful of how you represent yourself. Don't embarrass the team. Don't embarrass the university. So we tell them about best practices, but there is no formal censorship of any kind. As I see many of our students who participate in intercollegiate athletics as the marketing person in the athletic department, being some of our best ambassadors. You'll see a football player getting people hyped for a game and getting 78 retweets and 232 likes, or a baseball player saying something funny that I think gives people a glimpse into his personality that makes them want to root for them maybe in a deeper and more profound way than they did before. So I see them as, in many ways, helpful to the cause.
According to a couple of the IU basketball players, social media is not highly monitored here at IU, but rather used in some of the ways that Jeremy Gray described.
I think we're trusted with our social media, just to be smart with it. I try and limit it just to stay on top of school, Hoosier Hysteria coming up. For the rest of the season, there might be a couple, tweets here and there, about the games and some stuff like that.
We don't, talk about using it, but some of us probably just, like I said, retweet the Indiana basketball page or just, hype it up, I guess.
So, Lydia, you got a chance to talk with the men's basketball players as well as Jeremy Gray. What were some of the things that you noted about the policy that we have here in Indiana when it comes to social media accounts?
Specifically, one of the things that first stood out to me was how lenient the compliance and media departments are with their players. They don't require coaches to follow the players. They don't require them to monitor their players at all. Obviously, if something were to be brought to their attention, then repercussions could happen. But as far as strict rules and guidelines, there was nothing. So the players really have the freedom to use their social media as they wish, but obviously are encouraged to do what's best for themselves as well as for the team and for the rest of IU.
Now, as we heard, Clemson has a very strict policy. Let's talk a little bit about that, first of all. Is it fair for a coach to prevent the players from being on social media in season? We'll go ahead and start with Amon this time.
Me personally, I'm a private individual, so I feel like nothing that is personally going on in your life should go on your social media. Which piggyback into saying that coaches should have a little bit of, I guess, policy going towards what these students. Not these, some of them may be grown, but these students need to have some sort of guidance as to what's right and what's wrong, because it's not new, but at the same time it is new at the way that we use it and the way that we communicate and the things that are being said and displayed on these social media accounts. You have to definitely put some sort of, I guess, halt towards what can be and cannot be said towards, because you not only put an image on yourself when you put things out, but you are representing your school, you're representing your team, as Lydia said. There should be some, but there's definitely not, it shouldn't be binding their hands about what they can and can't put, but you should definitely have, you shouldn't be putting up nudes. It's not okay.
Well, my kind of solution to that would be, like I've talked about it before, I think that for every incoming freshman who is an athlete at a school, a student athlete, they should be required to take a social media class, just learning about the do's and don'ts of what they should be doing on social media, just kind of like the requirements about like what should be said, what shouldn't be said. I think that should be like a really important thing, because there are some times where the student athletes, they do some stuff and it kind of goes out of line. To talk about an example, Chad Swag Kelly, the quarterback for Ole Miss, he was tweeting at a former adult film star not too long ago, and then she put that out on the web for everyone to see, and then it just all came back to him, and everyone was saying, why are you doing this? You can't be doing this. You have to represent your school. You're a Division I athlete. So everyone should be required to take a social media class just to learn about what should be done, but I don't think that they should be completely prevented by the coaches from participating in any kind of social media.
I would agree with you, Griffin, and I think within IU, I know in my package you saw Jeremy Gray talks about how the players can be the ambassadors of the school, and that's really their role. They have the respect of other people, their students, as well as people outside of the campus. They have a large role here in the school. They have a following. People want to see what they have to say, and it should make it positive, because that's only going to market themselves as well as the school in a better light.
And I definitely agree with that, because you have thousands and hundreds of little children that who have access to this as well.
Exactly.
So you definitely have to be mindful of a lot of things, but you should also be yourself. At some point you still have to be yourself, but definitely be mindful of what can be detrimental or offensive to someone.
Now, of course, someone's going to say, that's violating the First Amendment rights. But as everyone knows, we're all media majors. We all have a vested interest in the First Amendment. But at the same time, you can't yell fire in a crowded room. There are a lot of things you cannot do, even with the First Amendment. But can an athlete's social media account really be considered yelling fire in a crowded room, though, Lydia?
So an example that comes to mind is Purdue basketball. Purdue's basketball department is much more strict than IU's. They require that all of their athletes get completely off of social media during the season. They're not allowed to use it whatsoever. To me, that's a little infringing on their First Amendment rights. If there happened to be something that came up, or a big event, even tweeting about the games, but even more specific, I guess, politically, religiously, if they want to put those opinions out there, I say do it. That's who you are. That's your beliefs. You should not be constrained and not allowed to share what you actually believe just because it's not what a coach agrees with or because what the university believes as a whole. You're an individual. You have your own rights, and I think putting those on social media in an appropriate fashion is okay.
It's a very fair point. We are in a time now where a lot of people are, let's just say, becoming more aware of their First Amendment rights and exercising them, maybe to some extremes, but exercising them nonetheless. And when you consider some of the repercussions, for example, a poll came out not too long ago that said about a third of NFL players have stopped watching simply because someone took a knee during the national anthem. Is that what athletic departments could be afraid of? Or should they not even be afraid of that at all?
I think that's definitely something that they could be afraid of, and I see why that would make them want to take action, but is that necessarily the right thing to do? Is that going to be benefiting their athletes at all? And I don't think it is. I think even though it might be hurting their department right now, in the long run, their athletes taking a stand for what they believe could build them a reputation. It could increase a following of a different fan base, I guess you could say, and not necessarily their old fans, but it does attract attention elsewhere. I mean, who knew of, Kaepernick, for example? We never saw nearly as much media attention of him until he started taking a knee during some of the national anthems and sitting down for those. And that was when finally people were like, oh, wow, maybe this, means something. Why is he doing this? And now they're interested and they want to see what's going on.
Should athletes, whether or not they're a student athlete or professional athlete, should they use their fame? I mean, we saw, the ESPYs, for example, when you had a lot of athletes get up and make a very impassioned speech. That is their right to do that, but can it be abused?
I definitely think that for the student athletes' purposes, they should be able to use that fame, I guess you're talking about, to kind of express whatever opinions they have. Because for a student athlete's purpose, if you're a big-time D1 athlete, you might only have 3 or 4 years to be in the spotlight. And at that point, you're at the top of your game, and everyone's following you on Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is. You only have so little time to try to get out a certain message that you might want to. It's not something that can carry on because not everyone goes to the NFL, not everyone goes to the NBA or the MLB. You only have so much time to get out your certain message. So I think if they have something to spread, then that's the exact time to do it. I mean, they should do it within reason, but I think that's the exact time. If they want to try to spread out a message, then I think that's it.
And I want to piggyback off that because a lot of these players, if you want to take it to a specific region, you have people who are urban players, come from inner cities. They've never had this platform to actually express how they feel, tell people what's really going on, and actually use what they have themselves to help a bigger cause. And so I feel like they should be allowed to use some of their fame, if that's what you want to call it, pro or collegiate level fame, to push that. Because when you're in the urban area and you don't see any hope, and then you get to look at that television and you see somebody doing something that gives you hope for tomorrow to continuously go on, and you may inspire somebody to play football just like you, or inspire somebody to play basketball just like you and get on that same platform and spread that same message. So I feel like you should definitely be allowed to at least, like I said, have your own personality, but definitely not offensive.
Well, what is offense nowadays, though?
True statement. We're getting sensitive.
Well, these are only some of the things that, we obviously can't cover them all in the amount of time that we have, but it's always nice to talk about them. Thanks, Griffin, Amon, and Lydia for joining me today. And thank you for watching this week. You can always throw us a suggestion or any questions about sports by going to our Facebook page at IUSTV Sports and by interacting with our Twitter at IUSTV Sports. Toss it up and find out if we'll catch it. Until next Sunday, be proud and cheer loud.